All right, what is going on, fellas? I believe this is questions number 54. We're also going to throw some hot and cold takes in there because I asked for those in the same community post where I asked you guys for your questions. So it's going to be a mix of the two series. I'll probably just put this under the questions playlist. So I got 53 other ones of these. Yeah, we're going to get straight into these. Mr. Ode is mad because it is time for his evening WALK because he knows that word. I'm a little concerned he might kill me. So I'm going to get speed through this and I will appease the big fella. Also, I demand credit. I did the hot and cold lifting takes first. I did it before Joffrey. I did it before Paris. I demand my credit. That aside, we're going to get straight into these. The first one is one of the fellas that I coach. His name on Instagram is Pulldown Yanker. His name on YouTube is Pulldown Yanker. And his hot take is ego lifting lat pull downs will grow your back. So, one, yes, it will grow your back. It's not as though using cheated form automatically makes it not stimulatory towards the muscles, right? I think most of the people that argue against cheated form it's more so because we can quantify where mechanical failure is if our form is standardized. And it's very difficult to standardize cheated form. That being said, one thing Joffrey has talked about a good bit is that cheat reps, particularly on back movements, are somewhat practical and in anecdotal experience, somewhat efficacious. The other thing someone mentioned in reply to this is that kind of cheating is inherent to the execution of a lat pull down. I think this idea of a perfectly vertical torso lat pull down is something that sounds great on paper, and lots of people who are very new to lifting will critique someone for not doing, when they see the video of their lat pull downs, they're like, oh, well, the little guy on the sticker on the lat pull down machine does it this way. That's correct form. This big guy has bad form. And while there are absolutely big guys with bad form, I don't necessarily think that having a variable torso angle while you do your lat pull downs is an example of bad form. If anything, that would be my default prescription as to how to do them. At the top, we are coming to a fully vertical torso, getting our head through and achieving a good stretch at the top. And then to initiate the movement, we actually bring our torso angle back slightly, pull back, keeping the chest high. That's generally how I would coach them. Now, like anything else, we can use a little bit of momentum, and I don't think it's the end of the world. But it can be taken too far. I think there's a point at which you're using so much momentum that we are missing good stimuli for the lats, and also our proximity to failure is who the fuck knows. So I would say reasonably hot take. I think that using some cheated form on lat pull downs can absolutely be good for gains. I think that the incorporation of a system of maybe 2 strict sets and then 1 maybe cheat set is something that a lot of people have seen success with. And I think for some exercises it's not appropriate, but lat pull downs would be one where that style of 2 highly strict sets, 1 a little bit looser form set would absolutely be something that I think has a low risk of injury and could be potentially a means of taking a set past the point of traditional mechanical failure that you could definitely benefit from. So I'd say that's a reasonably hot take. Demetrius toes that line and definitely passes it at times, but I would say that's not a horrible take. The next one is the best row that supplements the strict press. I genuinely don't care about bench or other lifts. Well, I would encourage you to care about other lifts. I think holistic strength development is cool. The idea that your strength starts and stops in your upper body, not my cup of tea, but I respect your goals. That's actually a somewhat interesting question because if we don't care about our other lifts, something like the barbell row, where a lot of the time lifters might favor away from it because our lower back recovery is a limited economy, and we probably would be better spent using all of our lower back economy on squatting and hinging variations. So maybe we don't have room for rowing variations to take up lower back training economy. If we're not taking those other lifts very seriously at all, that frees up a lot of lower back training economy to where the barbell row might be a lot more fitting, and the lower back strength that you build from the barbell row might assist you in that strict overhead press. We do need a good amount of strength through our midsection in our low back and our abs to stabilize a big overhead press. Most people who are training deadlift and squat seriously are going to have that trunk stability that they need for the overhead press for the most part without needing to do a ton of additional work. Just the fact that they've been working on building up a big squat and deadlift has put enough strength on at the very least their lower back to where that's not going to be an issue. But if the strict press is your primary objective, there's a chance that we need to make sure that lower back is good to go, and a barbell row could be a good option. That being said, there's no one row that's gonna unlock some level of pressing strength. The lats are not a primary mover. The upper back is not a primary mover-ish. I mean, you could say that, okay, well, your upper traps are going to rotate your scap upward and they're going to contribute to that upward press. But more than likely, there is no rowing variation that's going to suddenly make a huge night and day difference. So what I would do is I would probably just have a rotation of a couple of ones that you know all work similarly well. Once you feel like one's starting to get stale, rotate to another one that you think works well. I would say they don't need to be chest supported, given that your training economy towards your main lift isn't as taxing on the lower back. And I would say that mess around with maybe finding rows that proprioceptively feel like the back tightness you create at the bottom of your strict press. So that way maybe we could get a little bit of skill transfer from our rowing as well. The next one, hot take, beltless training is overrated. Yes, you don't want to make any piece of equipment a crutch, but proper bracing with a belt is a skill, and like any skill, it needs to be practiced over and over again to get the most out of it. I would say this is a pretty reasonable take. I think I've said something similar to this a couple times on the channel. The EMG activity of your core, for whatever that is worth, is actually higher with a belt on. So this idea that putting on a belt turns off your core or is going to lead to a weak core is largely unfounded. As you said, there's probably a point at which the belt becomes a crutch and maybe beltless work might make sense, but using the belt is a skill and we want to practice that skill as often as possible. No one's going to make you go deadlift without your belt on you. If you're going to be going to deadlift in a competition, whether it be strongman or powerlifting, you're allowed to wear the belt. So being good at using the belt is a very relevant skill. It doesn't really matter what you could do for a beltless 1RM. So I would say that, oh, well, there's a 100-pound difference between my beltless pull and my belted pull. Awesome. That means you're good at using a belt. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I've become slightly less against beltless work because I think it can yield some technique benefits. You know, I think some people, when they put on the belt, it's a little bit of a Band-Aid. They think their lower back becomes indestructible, and they tend to maybe use a technique that over-relies on the lower back. Whereas if you have them do a beltless rep, they're a little bit more keen to brace well and try to do as much work with their legs on the squat as they can, or they're more keen to distribute the load on their deadlift to their posterior chain and do a little bit more pure of a hinge when they don't have their magical low back Band-Aid. I myself am guilty of this. So I think that it can have some good application as a technique building tool from time to time. I think it can be a good self-limiting variation. If you want to take a little bit of load off that bar, taking away the belt is a way to keep that motion fundamentally the same, so our specificity remains reasonably high. We could reduce the load a little bit, but I'm gonna give you the certified hot take degree. Using a belt is a skill, and the fact that you have a lower beltless max usually isn't this big red flag that people think it is. The next one, how to incorporate barbell rows to mitigate lower back fatigue. There were two replies to this that I think are reasonable context. One guy basically saying, well, do you really need to do them? I think the stimulus to fatigue ratio is not too favorable, that he doesn't have the lower back economy to fit them into his program, so he would rather use chest supported T-bar rows and seal rows to get in his horizontal pulling volume. And then the other guy replied, do them after your deadlifts. Lump lower back work onto 2 days a week max. Squats and RDLs one day, deadlifts and squat variations and barbell rows the other. I think that both of these are reasonable points, right? So the first one is to do them with your deadlifts. And I think conceptually this is to say to think of a barbell row as a deadlift variation, right? So we're not going to be doing it on our upper body days. It seems to be largely the meta within our niche of YouTube fitness here is kind of coming towards this, okay, well, we have one push-pull day where we have some combination of vertical and horizontal pushing and pulling, and then we have this kind of squat, deadlift, leg ab day, right? Upper lower rest, or upper lower rest, whatever people want to do. That seems to be a largely emerging meta. And I think that that is a solid split. It's certainly not the end all be all. There's tons of other very appropriate splits that someone could use. I don't think a PPL split is that bad. So I would say that first, yes, if we are following that idea of upper and lower, treating the deadlift or treating the barbell row as a light deadlift variation as far as how we program it, because it is taxing on the low back, you are in deadlift relevant positions. Maybe that could be your secondary deadlift day, right? So maybe the RDLs, your hamstrings are reasonably strong, or maybe you like doing hamstrings on your primary deadlift day. Or let's say you're someone who does stiff legs as their main deadlift variation. That means you could absolutely fit in barbell rows as your lighter variation. I don't think that limiting low back loading to 2 days a week is necessarily always a rule. I think that some people respond better to splitting that same amount of lower back work across 3 days, in which case you could have one heavy lower back focused training day with like maybe deadlifts, one medium with like RDLs or stiff legs, and then one light one with either back extensions or barbell rows. So treating it as the lightest option of a deadlift variation can work quite well, especially if the reason we're doing them is to build up our deadlifts. Just throwing them after your deadlift as well. Just centering that lower back fatigue on a singular day. That way you get more days off the low back to rest can all be valid options. And then the other question is, what are you doing them for? If you are doing them because they make your deadlift feel good, awesome. Treat them as a deadlift accessory or deadlift variation, and they're going to be placed in the program accordingly. But if they are for upper body development and you're hoping that they're going to help with purely upper back development, not also looking for that extra lower back loading, then we might lean into using more chest supported variations rather than the barbell rows to maximize that lower back training economy for our other lifts. The next one, the best core workout is high rep squats. I disagree with you. Is it a good core workout? For sure. But if I go do a tough 10 RM on squats, I'm not feeling my core the next day. I'm feeling everything else, but I'm not necessarily feeling my core is what is most taxed from that, right? And you can't directly extrapolate soreness to growth, but there is a strong correlation between the two. And I would say that most often the limiting factor within a squat is not going to be abdominal strength. And if it's not the limiting factor, then it's probably not the best workout for that muscle, right? Let's see. I could probably also think of things that are more taxing on your core, right? I would say compared to a back squat, maybe a front squat is more taxing on your core. A step up from that, I would say that a heavy yoke run is a hell of a lot better core workout than a squat because it's all the same trunk demands, but moving with more weight. And then from there, I think that it kind of depends on what the goal of the core workout is. If the goal is hypertrophying the core, I would definitely think there's a strong case for tons of things over the squat. If we're talking about like midsection generalized strength, sure, you definitely have a strong argument that it's up there, but I definitely don't think you could say it's the best. I know you're probably talking in hyperbole and I'm taking it literally, and that is not fair, but I digress. Now, 45-degree incline bench press is the single greatest display of pressing power, straight up. Now, I don't necessarily agree with this. I don't know why it would be any better of a display than anything else. You could say, oh, well, you can cheat the bench press by arching. Well, you can also cheat the overhead press by arching. And shockingly, you can also cheat the incline press by arching. You can also have your butt come up off the bench just like you can in a bench press. You can also use like a good amount of leg drive, just like you could fudge an overhead press or fudge a bench press. So I don't necessarily think that it's any greater a display of strength than pressing in any other plane. I think that this idea that, oh, we need to find the cheat-proof exercise. I don't think there is a cheat-proof exercise. People are going to find out how to do anything most efficiently, right? It's more a matter of, well, if we're trying to appraise general strength, not just how proficient someone is at the lift, just look at the lift, right? I don't think it's unreasonable to say that a close grip minimal arch bench press is a greater display of general pressing power than a wide grip big arch bench. Even if the wide grip big arch bench has a bit more weight and scores better in a powerlifting competition, that is the stronger bench press. But if you're saying what's the better display of generalized pressing strength, I get what you're getting at there. So we could just assess we could just look at the lift. I don't think that there's anything magical about a 45-degree incline. I'm also biased because that's my one plane of pressing that isn't so great due to it giving me some shoulder issues. So I think it's shit. I think it's actually, it doesn't test any strength at all. But yeah, no, I think it's a good one. I think it is a very solid test. It's got a very sizable range of motion. It's testing triceps, delts, and pecs all together. Whereas something like a dip is going to be a bit of pec, a lot of tricep, but not necessarily testing the shoulders quite as much. Something like an overhead press is obviously testing the pecs in a very minimal fashion, even with layback. So you could say, oh, well, it's kind of testing all of the pressing musculature, and I think you could make a decent argument there. But I don't think there's anything magical about a 45-degree incline bench that couldn't be also said by about any other plane of pressing. As long as we're comparing apples to apples, I think that all of them are good tests of pressing strength. How would you train an MMA enthusiast? Main interest is martial arts, but hypertrophy and strength is nice too. So I love combat sports. I have some strong opinions on this. And the biggest thing is, with a couple of small exceptions, I don't think that you should approach your strength and conditioning all that differently from what just about anyone else is doing. Obviously, maybe including some explosive rotational work, maybe including some plyos into your strength and conditioning routine, as well as the conditioning portion that maybe your average gym bro wouldn't be doing. So some HIIT work, some plyos, a little bit of rotational plane work. But outside of that, I think that specificity is reserved for your sparring and your drilling and your MMA specific practice sessions, whether that be grappling or striking or full MMA sparring. That is where the specificity happens. Trying to mirror that stuff in the weight room, every now and then you can say, oh, well, I feel that, like, I know lots of guys like towel pull-ups. Lots of grapplers are big on those for working pulling musculature, which is just crucial for grappling, as well as grip strength, which is also quite crucial, especially for gi jiu-jitsu. But regardless, I think that, you can find, oh, well, this motion I feel correlates with this task within MMA, and that's valid. But this idea of always chasing specificity within the weight room, I think is a fool's errand, and we should just be looking to develop our overall physicality in the gym. So I think that your approach would be pretty similar, just condensed into less sessions per week. Maybe you would be doing 2 to 3 full body sessions, or maybe 1 upper, 1 lower, and a full, depending on how much you feel like you would benefit from building up your general physicality. Obviously, the biggest thing is making sure that it doesn't interfere significantly with your more specific training. But that would be my general off-the-dome thoughts. If you have more specific questions, more than happy to answer those. The next one is, hot takes are great and all, but I'm still waiting for the reveal of the decade. What is Max's Every Time We Touch remix called? A friend really wants to know. So I've told Max, I said, hey Max, a bunch of people are asking for what that Cascadia remix was called. And he just goes, oh, I told you it's some good shit, and walks off. But he won't tell me. So I don't know what's going on there. You should go harass him on his Instagram, though, until he drops the link. Next one is from Paris. You should find creative ways to push to and beyond failure on your accessories. Sure, I agree with that. I think it depends on the accessory, right? The bigger and greater tonnage the accessory, I think the less the need to push past failure, and oftentimes the less of a good idea it is to push past failure. So I know that you know this, but for other people, something like a heavy full range of motion hack squat or leg press, I don't think we need to train past failure to see great gains. I think that it would just fucking fry you for minimal extra benefit. I don't even think on those big heavy tonnage full range of motion leg exercises that we need to train to failure. I would say that training to a true RPE 8 on a 12 rep hack squat is already disgustingly hard, and you don't need to make it any harder because it will be disproportionately fatiguing to beneficial. Not a great idea. Let's see. I think that honestly, to some degree, you could probably say the same thing about a lot of leg work. I think that You could definitely get away with taking to and past failure on a leg extension or a hamstring curl. And especially if that's the kind of training you enjoy, you prefer doing a little bit harder sets and doing fewer of them rather than doing a little bit less hard sets and doing more of them. And that's just the kind of training you enjoy. You could take those sets past failure via drop sets, via rest pause, via cheat reps, via assisted reps. All these methods of training past mechanical failure can be valid options to extend your final set. And I think that it can really calibrate what you feel is working hard. It can go well. I think you could do that on calves. You could do that on leg extensions. But I think when we get into these bigger compound accessories, probably not the best idea. Lots of pressing variations. I wouldn't necessarily do it just out of a general safety concern. I think back work, sometimes you can get away with it. As I feel maybe cheat reps are uniquely helpful on back work when compared to any other muscle group where I might shy away from them a little bit more. But I would say for like shit like arms, absolutely. For shit like delts, absolutely. No, taking your set of lateral raises isn't going to be disproportionately fatiguing, and it's going to like be a big issue. You're going to bury yourself. No, you're not. You could take those to failure just fine, and you could probably take them past failure without having to deal with too much systemic fatigue. I don't think it's too much of an issue. The next one, every beginner, I think this originally said something about DC training. DC training is dog crap training. You can look up the protocol if you just like learning about different methods of training. It's a high intensity bodybuilding routine that is quite solid. It was a big deal probably about 5-10 years ago. It was kind of the talk of the town. It's a lower volume, higher intensity program that I think is reasonably good, or not reasonably good. It's very good. It's a very solid approach to training. I think it's by Dante Trudel. No, I don't remember who made dog crap. And I know that is blasphemous to those of you who are bodybuilding guys. But that being said, he changed it over to any high intensity training for at least a few weeks. Not right at the start of their training career, of course, but I feel like every lifter should learn to push themselves to the max in order to understand how to regulate intensity later on. Okay, so that's a good point. So you say, okay, well, I don't want them necessarily doing this crazy high intensity, low volume routine right off the bat when they're a beginner, because you need to have your form pretty locked in before you even consider really high intensity training. But you say at some point they should follow like a high intensity routine. The problem is, I think that the newer the lifter, because they're newer lifters aren't able to get as much stimulus out of a single set. A, because they're weaker and they're not moving as much tonnage. B, there's not as much muscle to damage potentially. C, they're less neurally efficient and they haven't mastered that getting everything out of a set skill. So, spending time on a low volume routine before you are reasonably developed could be an issue, and they might be needing to do more volume. I agree with this overall. I think that everybody needs to go through a phase where they calibrate their RPE and realize how much further away failure is than they thought it was. Suddenly they see a bunch of gains when their RPE 8 is actually 2 reps in reserve, not 5 reps in reserve. So everybody needs to go through it at some point. I don't think you necessarily need to follow a low volume, high intensity routine though. I think that just implementing the strategy of taking your final set to mechanical failure can teach people that skill and help them calibrate their RIR, as long as they're honest with themselves about taking that final set where it needs to be taken. And if they won't take it to where it needs to be taken, they weren't going to do that on the DC routine either. They're not going to make it. And that is their fault. Next one. I think unassisted GHRs are an underrated feat of posterior chain strength. This is from Noah, a guy I coach who recently became able to do these. So a little biased opinion. So here's the problem, right? Based on the settings of the glute ham raise and based on whether you're keeping your hips all the way through, your glutes are flexed and your back is ramrod straight, or whether you kind of have a big bend at the hips, you're arching at the back, and you have it on easier settings, the glute ham raise can be a very difficult exercise that even strong athletes are doing sets of 5, 6 on, even like advanced athletes, to something that a low-level intermediate could bang out a set of 20, right? And due to that lack of standardization in technique and settings on the machine, it kind of makes it hard to say whether it's a good feat of strength, right? Jasper, the other guy I coach, can bang out a set of 20 on these, and I don't think it's because his hamstrings are that strong. It's because he fudges them. I would say that you could probably make a better argument for like an unassisted Nordic because that is highly standardized, right? Based on how far away we put the leg thing here, the pivot point can move up our thigh to a higher point where it's easier, or it could move all the way down towards our knee. Whereas a Nordic, the pivot point is our knee, and it is what it is. And if we're not doing a push off the ground, which could be variable, we're doing a true unassisted Nordic, then it is highly standardized. I would definitely say that is a very high level display of lower body strength. This is a great question. Any thoughts on training density, both in the short term and the long term? So there's a lot of people would say, oh, well, there's a lot of different ways to drive overload. You know, you could do more volume, you could do more weight for the same volume, or you could do the same workout with less rest intervals, right? So improving our workout density would be a form of overload. Now, I don't know how much hypertrophy doing the exact same workload in less time is going to drive. So I don't know whether I think that training density is a good driver of hypertrophy. I'm not sure I'm bought into that. The literature I've seen kind of goes against this notion that workout density is vital, which a lot of old school guys kind of preached, oh, you should get your workout done in an hour. Anymore, you're just going catabolic, you're going backwards. I don't think that workout density is this great pinnacle of hypertrophy. That being said, improving your workout density can be a really good way to drive up your work capacity in a hypertrophy phase to set you up to handle more work during your strength phase. So I don't think it's a useless metric. I think that as far as just developing like your robust physicality, your ability to do a certain amount of work in a certain amount of time is a very relevant skill. It's just not directly the skill that leads to big muscles. Maybe having that work capacity will then let you handle more volume, which then makes you grow more. But I don't know if I think training density is this huge driver. That being said, I do think that there's a time and a place to try to develop your training density. Maybe when you begin a new training cycle, you come out of a peaking phase, you hit some new 1RMs, and you're going to enter a hypertrophy phase. But if you go do your 8 reps on squats, you're going to be more limited by gassing out than you are your muscles. So you're like, okay, well, I'm going to run through a 3-week kind of work capacity phase. And so if we think, okay, well, the traditional model of training is hypertrophy, strength, peak. You could probably add in a 4th one there, which is like work capacity phase, or more of a GPP phase with a focus on developing capacity. Prior to the hypertrophy phase, that way you have enough work capacity to make sure that everything you do in your hypertrophy phase is limited by your musculature, not your wind. I think other people might take the approach of having some background work capacity focused training through all 3 of the regular phases. But I think that whether or not it's a background thing or a dedicated phase of training, developing your work capacity via work density can be valid. I know I'm rambling a little bit. The reason I'm rambling is because I had another point and another example of when I like workout density, and I'm completely blanking on it. So maybe I will remember before I go upload this. Maybe I won't. All right, get into the last 2. Have you had any experience/success with really heavy unrack and hold for time for post-potentiation? Post-potentiation activation. So for example, you're working with squats, but before you hit your work weight, you unrack 1RM plus 50% and hold it for 15 seconds. Do you incorporate any other methods of post-potentiation into your training? So, first of all, no, especially not plus 50%, right? I think that post-potentiation activation, which is this idea that we do a heavy hold, rest for a little bit, and then we go for a heavy single. That way we've kind of activated our nervous system. At the very least, if you go do a heavy bench unrack, take off the weight, and then do a heavy single, the weight is going to feel lighter. On paper, this is something that's like the holy grail of training methodology. It's kind of like weight releasers. On paper and based on studies, this should be the shit. But in practical application, very few high-level strength athletes use these, and many have tried. One reason is if I were to do this, I would have to go unrack a 1,080-pound squat, which I don't know if we have enough room on the bar to do that. I don't think I would squat more after unracking that, I'll tell you that. So as you get stronger and stronger, it becomes less practical. It becomes more fatiguing to do the hold. I think that it can have a time and a place with athletes that are a bit of a head case, when they're constantly doubting themselves and the weight feeling heavy is going to doom their lift. If they're intermediate, lower level advanced, I think that holding 105% prior, maybe even 110, can be a way to help them overcome that psychological barrier. But this is a short-term workaround, not a long-term solution. The long-term solution is to help them understand that we train to be able to lift things that feel heavy. Just because it feels heavy doesn't mean you can't lift it, and really internalizing that idea, right? Something doesn't have to feel light to have a successful lift. But it can be a good way to work around that in the short term. I have had a couple of athletes who were kind of running into a wall. I felt like their training was indicating that they were going to break through that wall, but when it came to max week, they weren't. And I found that using a little bit of post-activation potentiation helped them. Another thing you can do for this is doing something explosive, like a box jump, which absolutely could be worked into a program at any level, and it could work very well for you. It's something you could try. So before you go for a heavy deadlift, you could go hit a high box jump and then feel more explosive on your pull. It's not going to be fatiguing as doing like a heavy rack hold would be, and that is perfectly viable. But as far as super maximal weights, 150% is way too high. And if we look at high level athletes, when they're preparing for a 1RM, whether it be powerlifters or most of the time good strongmen, their preparation is entirely submaximal. This idea that we need to expose our body to super maximal weights to drive forward progression is kind of something that's gone by the wayside. Yes, it can be a cool little trick to get some weight on the bar at some point in your training career. It becomes less and less viable. And as you get better mastery of the training process, you become able to have an entirely sub-maximal preparation. Max keeps lifting more and more every meet, and the most he lifts is what he lifts on the platform. At no point does he expose his body, or I want to feel what the weight feels like, or I want to teach my body what the weight feels like, or whatever. Any of these old school rationales, none of them are necessary. With a proper submaximal preparation, every single time he's ready to go lift more than he has ever lifted on the platform. And I would say, yeah, I'm not a big fan of any super maximal work in general. I think every now and then you can fit it in and it'll work, whether it be like someone who responds well to a board press or a block pull, or maybe a yoke carry to get a lot of weight on their back every now and then, but it's never a long-term strategy. It's more of like, okay, cool, this worked for a little bit, but it doesn't work indefinitely. I have a big bias against super maximal work. I just don't think it is a good way. Maybe it's a good way to show off what you have built, but it's not a good way to build. Last one. Sorry for being so rambly. I had a lower body day today where I had 550 for max reps on pause SSB, and that fucking fried me. I got 7, which is a pretty good set for me. I'm definitely on pace to be at all-time best back squat strength, much quicker than I expected, so I'm pretty stoked, but I'm also pretty fried. The last one. Cable face pulls are a premier bang for the buck delt isolation. If you do with a focus on delts, it grows your rear and side delts succulently and keeps your shoulders feeling great. Okay, so 1, for shoulder health, awesome. We're just challenging external rotation. I like having something that challenges external rotation somewhere in the program. The pec and the lat, which we get very strong from our strength training, both act as secondary internal rotators of the shoulder for the idea of structural symmetry, for however important that is. It's cool to keep some external rotation strength, and face pulls are an awesome 2 birds, 1 stone way to check off that box of having a bit of external rotation work present in the program. So for shoulder health, awesome. I'm going to nitpick you slightly. I definitely would not call them a delt isolation exercise because we are working our, especially our rear and upper traps quite a bit, which is part of the reason that they are awesome for shoulder health, but definitely wouldn't qualify them as maybe a isolation exercise, but I get what you mean. They're a lower scale exercise focused on hypertrophy of localized areas, accessory, if you will. That being said, I don't know, man. I think that they're awesome because we're hitting 2 birds reasonably well with 1 stone. We're getting that external rotation. We're getting some good rear and lateral delt work out of them for sure, but I don't think that they are as good for hypertrophying the rear and lateral heads of the delt when compared to their alternatives, right? I think that a cable crossbody lateral raise or even a dumbbell lateral raise is going to outperform them for lateral delt hypertrophy. And I think that a Powell raise or a crossbody cable rear delt fly is going to outperform them for rear delt hypertrophy. But that being said, the glory is in the fact of how many things we get done decently well at the same time, so that way we don't have to do a billion different exercises. We don't have to go do a lateral raise, a rear delt fly, and an extra cable external rotation. We can kind of check all those boxes good enough with these, which I think is a very good option for guys who, like myself, who have a primary emphasis on strength, maybe a secondary emphasis on physique. And it's more so a matter of, okay, I want to get wicked strong and I also want to look wicked strong. I don't necessarily need to have the best physique on planet Earth. It just needs to be good enough that I feel I look decent. I don't need to maximize my physique. And that's kind of where I fall. I want to look okay, or at least I want to look strong. I don't look okay anymore, but I look like I'm strong. And as long as I look like I'm strong, I'm a happy guy. So it's not a matter of, okay, well, I don't want to look as good as possible. I have a minimum threshold of how decent I want to look, and then it's a matter of getting strong. And we have a lot of work that we have to do to get strong. We don't necessarily have this economy to do a million different isolation exercises. This idea of checking multiple boxes at once, yes, it's not optimal for any one of those muscle groups, but it's good enough because your physique goals don't necessarily require optimal because it's not trying to maximize your physique. So that would be my general thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you, boys.